Hi, I'm Steve Hamilton. I think the state of public transit in America is a self-inflicted wound. I'm trying to contribute to healing that wound. And I'd like to tell you a healing story, and a true story, that I'm betting you've never heard before. I think we can all agree that America has an addiction problem. Now, addiction has many faces: drugs, alcohol, sex, texting. There are various approaches used to treat addiction, but they all start with the same first step. You must first acknowledge you've got a problem. When I first started looking into public transportation about 5 years ago, it only took me a matter of months to understand that we had a technology problem, and only another couple of months to conceive of how to solve it. Now, that should have been my first clue that I had not yet really understood the root cause. It was after several more years and a lot of frustration that I came to really understand that what we have is an organizational problem. Now, when I was a young man, I hated history. I didn't have the patience for it. It's only as I've aged that I've come to appreciate the richness of learning you can gain by taking time to really understand how we got here. And as Edmund Burke famously said, those who don't know history. So today I want to tell you a story. It's the story of UMTA. Now, half of you don't even know what I'm talking about, and the other half think you do. But it's often good to read multiple histories of the same person or event, because each historian pulls out of the story his own unique perspective. What we know of today as the Federal Transit Administration was born under a different name. And for the first 9 years of its existence, it was an entirely different type of organization. So, get it? You have a problem. It's an organizational problem associated with public transit, and there are lessons to be learned from the history of UMTA. So here's my story. Now, text without context is error, so let me set the context. I remember coming home from elementary school one day and watching with my father the video replay on the evening news of this presidential speech.
The following national goals. First, I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth. No.
Now, let me tell you, it was the topic of discussion for days, everywhere. And at the time, we all thought it's absolutely impossible. It was the stuff of science fiction. But Kennedy was well enough informed to understand the difference between science and technology development. And in the coming months, this strange new agency called the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, became a common household word. Now, NASA followed a plan. First, they gathered a multi-disciplinary team of scientists and academicians. They held conferences and wrote reports to fully understand the problem and enumerate the challenges. Then they debated and ultimately formed a consensus on a conceptual solution. Then they listed all of the capabilities they needed to execute that concept and identified which ones already existed and which ones needed to be developed. Then, NASA gathered a multidisciplinary team of aerospace, electronics, and medical device companies, and they issued development contracts for each of those not yet existing capabilities. And then finally, NASA itself took management responsibility for the integration and test plan. Now, over the ensuing years, we, the public, watched them systematically execute this plan. When Kennedy was assassinated, Johnson became president, and he promised to carry forward Kennedy's vision. 4 years after Kennedy's speech, man had not yet reached the moon, but we all knew it would happen. Our attitude had been completely changed. The nation had other problems. Among them was urban decay. The suburbs had exploded, and in doing so had sucked vital population out of the urban cores. This was leading to commercial decline in the core as well. As the suburbs had grown, so too had the population of cars. The commute to work, into and out of the city, was getting very congested. This was leading more companies to abandon the city and relocate to the suburbs. Now, a consensus was forming among the academics in urban development that better public transportation could arrest this decay process. Less than a year after his moon speech, Kennedy had asked Congress to address this with these words: "To ensure and enhance values in existing urban areas is essential, but at least as important are steps to promote economic efficiency and livability in areas of future development. Our national welfare therefore requires the provision of good urban transportation, with the properly balanced use of private vehicles and modern mass transport to help shape as well as serve urban growth." So Johnson saw an opportunity to exploit this new NASA can-do-anything spirit to create his own legacy program, like Kennedy's moonshot. Being a creature of the legislature, he knew exactly the right man for the job. He called upon Henry Royce, the congressman from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to write the legislation and to shepherd it through Congress. Johnson signed the bill in July of 1964 to form a new government agency within the Department of Housing and Urban Development called the Urban Mass Transit or Transportation Administration. Now, NASA had developed the technology to take men into space. We needed better technology to take men to work. So not surprisingly, UMTA was patterned after NASA. Note the first two among its three explicit objectives: investing in research and development of new ideas, and better planning for their deployment. Surprise, it's an R&D organization. Now, when UMTA got to work in 1965, its primary activity was R&D. Richard Nixon said it best a few years later in 1972, "A nation that can send 3 people across 240,000 miles of space to the moon should be able to send 240,000 people 3 miles across the city to work. This is an engineering problem." So, first, they gathered a multidisciplinary team of scientists and academicians to fully understand the problem, enumerate the challenges, form a consensus on a solution concept, and enumerate the existed and needing capacities. Does this sound familiar? So they commissioned 17 separate studies, and when the studies were completed, they met and created a vision of how to solve the problems. And they put in place a development plan to bring it to become a reality. In 1968, they published a summary of their findings and their vision in a book called Tomorrow's Transportation. It's still available. You can find it at this link. I've got a copy. I highly recommend you read it. You'll be amazed at how prescient it was and how on point it still is, even today, 50 years later. It offered the best new ideas of the day, including those listed here. What? You thought we didn't get this smart until the internet age? Among the most interesting of its conclusions is this: if the USA continued to advance public transportation by using only existing modes, which in 1968 would have been buses and trains, congestion would continue to increase. But if the new systems, called personal rapid transit, were gradually deployed, congestion could be reduced. Now, I'd be willing to bet that a lot of you in this audience have still never heard of PRT to this day. That's because we took the other route, which performed exactly as predicted. So that's how we got here. Now, UMTA targeted 5 systems to be developed. What they called dial-a-bus. Ever wonder why Uber didn't seek a method patent for IP protection on its idea? Well, it's because all of the elements of that idea were already in the public domain. The dial-a-bus system has all the elements of Uber, except for a smartphone is replacing the regular phone. How about horizontal conveyors? So they describe what we know today as moving sidewalks. You'll find them at airports. By the way, in 2017, a study in the Netherlands concluded that these are a viable option for downtown areas. Piggyback systems. Some of you may remember the car train for intercity travel. We still got one running actually up the East Coast, and they're very effectively used in Europe. And we make extensive use of it for trucked cargo. Now, they also saw a need for intra-urban trains, and they described several new types, including monorail and even Hyperloop. No, Elon Musk did not invent it. Finally, their ultimate solution is called Personal Rapid Transit. It's an automated taxi system using small, cheap, on-demand, networked APMs. So, UMTA gathered a team of aerospace companies. They issued development contracts for each of the needed capabilities through 1969, or from 1969 through 1974. Now, as the development contracts were completed, all the elements of this new world of public transit were coming together. So they put that vision on display in May of 1972 for 9 days at Dulles International Airport in DC. It was called Transpo 72. Now here you see a couple of examples of the first APMs. The first one led to a system later at the Dallas airport, and a few years after that to the Miami Metro Mover. The Otis system was a hovercraft rather than a wheel-based system. It also demonstrated one of the key advancements, offline stations. Now, a version of this system was installed at Duke University, actually a couple of years after I left there. An elevated suspended magnetic levitation system was also demonstrated. Now, this system combines air cushion ride with a linear motor propulsion system, the idea from the United Kingdom's scientist Eric Laithwaite. So what came out of this? Well, automatic passenger counters, automatic fare machines, moving sidewalks that you see at the airports today. Not only did they develop a new capability called automated people movers, they also created a 1977 initiative to promote APM adoption by cities. This is ultimately what resulted in the Miami Metro Mover, as well as ones in Jacksonville, Florida, and in Detroit. Now, today, APMs are found at about 100 airports worldwide. The APMs were just a step along the development path to their ultimate system, the Personal Rapid Transit System. Now, the Group Rapid Transit System in Morgantown, West Virginia, was their demonstration vehicle for this type of system. It continues in operation today, almost 45 years later. It has carried 16,000 riders per day since 1975, It is the safest form of motorized ground transit there is anywhere, accumulating more than 200 million passenger miles with only one very recent accident and no injuries at all. It provides a transit speed above 29 miles per hour, which is about twice as fast as urban car travel. And it operates profitably, one of only 8 such systems in America to do so. Now here's the Morgantown GRT. It uses APM-like vehicles with automated driving, and it's able to carry groups of up to about 20. But they operate on demand with empty vehicles waiting at the stations. And it implements the offline station, so through travel is not blocked by vehicles when they're involved in loading or unloading at a station. A 5.6-mile alignment connects university campus areas on opposite sides of downtown, and it's a public service used by both residents and students. Now, is this story news to you? So you're wondering, what happened to UMTA? Well, in 2 words, Richard Nixon. In 1 word, Watergate. When Nixon took office in 1969, he inherited all these development contracts and continued them. In fact, during his 1972 re-election campaign, he even touted them as evidence of his technology leadership. And he requested additional funding for them from Congress that year. He directed UMTA to allocate $20 million specifically for PRT development in the fall of that year. But Nixon was always a foreign policy president. To him, domestic policy was just a currency to be used for political support. Now, Detroit, the automakers there, had taken notice of Transpo 72 and what it might do to their business. Watergate was heating up, and Nixon needed all the friends he could buy. So the Watergate Committee later uncovered deliberate efforts by the Nixon administration to use government agencies and grants, including some at UMTA, to curry political support. Now, he won re-election in November of 72, but 1 month later, after his re-inauguration in January of 73, he brought in a new Secretary of Transportation and replaced all of the top leadership at UMTA. Under that new leadership, the UMTA de-emphasized research and development and instead worked on formulas for distributing money for existing transit to urban areas. This made the mayors and existing transit suppliers, that is donors and political supporters, happy. These formulas were codified by Congress the following year or so in the National Mass Transportation Act of 74, and the Department of Transportation regulations that were established under that act resulted in the creation of local metropolitan planning organizations across the nation, including in Miami in 1977. Now, in 1991, UMTA was renamed. It's now called the Federal Transit Administration. The FDA does not do transit product R&D anymore. The Transit Research Board, part of FDA, does contracted research on specific topics requested by various DOT agencies. If you scan the topic list, you'll find work on incrementally improving what we already do. Better signage for transit, better pavement for roads, testing it, the effectiveness of different lane markings, etc. You will find nothing transformative. Now, the IDEA program, that's Innovations Deserving of Exploratory Analysis, is the only open development support program that we have. And it's a competitive grant offering up to $100,000 of matching grant. So, number one, it's very limited. Number two, you got to find somebody else to support it. And in transportation terms, that's essentially nothing. And on top of that, if you accept the grant, then you've compromised your IP. It becomes open or public source. So meanwhile, the private industry in the form of Uber, Zipcar, Bike Share, Hyperloop, all the robocars, those all came from private industry, to name just a few, right? There are 40 plus driverless metros in the world. Only the 45-year-old Morgantown GRT, the Miami Metro mover, and the Las Vegas monorail even could be counted as such in the United States. And while American companies lead the world in automated cars, automation of public shuttles is led by To Get There, which is Dutch, Navaya and Easy Mile, which are French, and even the leading US offering, the Local Motors Ollie, was the result of a transit grant from Germany. So that's the history of the UMTA. What should we learn from this story? Well, lest you think this world is just too complex to adequately understand, it should be useful to know that not only was our present situation predictable, in theory in the past, but it was actually really predicted pretty accurately. So too, our future is predictable reasonably accurately. Now, if we look at the first 9 years of UMTA as compared to the 45 years since, it should convince us that the system we currently have strongly discourages R&D and real progress regarding transit. So keeping that system in place predicts a future that looks a lot like today, only worse. Now, those first 9 years should also convince us that there is an alternative. Transit R&D at the federal level can work. It needs to be coordinated by a singular but comprehensive vision. And it needs to view transit as a product, not just a technology. Development should be guided first by the rider's needs and second by the operator's needs. So those are the two futures we have in front of us as alternatives. Which future would you rather have?